Migration in toxicology, a threat to consumer safety. For this program, for this session, I'd like to invite Dr. Peter Langhammer as the session chairman to please come to the dais. And Dr. Peter Langhammer is the Vice President, Global HSC and Sustainability, Siegwerk, Germany. He is a PhD in chemistry and has more than 25 years of experience. He is a food chemist and is involved in association affairs and served in various committees and working groups both for the European Printing Ink Association and on a national level in Germany. During his professional career with Siegwerk, he has assumed responsibilities for product safety, in environmental affairs, engineering and maintenance, occupational, plant and fire safety issues, as well as for management systems. Currently at Siegwerk, he holds a worldwide responsibility for the product safety and industrial safety issues. At the same time, he is coordinating Siegwerk's sustainability activities. Along with him for this session, I'd like to invite Professor V.P. Sharma. He is the Senior Principal Scientist, Development Toxicology, CSIR, Indian Institute of Toxicology Research. Professor Sharma is serving as Senior Principal Scientist, Head Quality Assurance and Professor Academy of Council of Scientific and Industrial Research at CSIR, Indian Institute of Toxicology Research, Lucknow. He has more than 33 years of teaching and R&D experience and is well known for his communication skills and interaction with children for motivation, leadership training programs, besides R&D work of CSIR niche areas related to environment and toxicology aspects. His area of expertise is regulatory toxicology. During the last 3 decades, he has significantly contributed in significant areas like polymer toxicology, water quality monitoring and management, quality management systems, assurance under National Accreditation Board for testing and calibration of laboratories, NABL, as well as ISO 17025 and 9000 and 22000, and good laboratory practices in accordance to Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The third panelist in this session is Mr. Dilip Singh. Mr. Dilip Singh. He is the National Manager Hardlines, SGS India. Mr. Dilip Singh has 15 years of experience in testing, chemical regulations, chemical management, testing methods, and analysis of substances which are restricted by international bodies. Currently, he is working with SGS India, the leading inspection, testing, certification and audit company. He has in-depth knowledge and testing experience in materials and articles in contact with food to ensure that products meet appropriate international regulations for food contact materials and pave the way for compliance. In this session, which will be now for 1 hour, which actually was supposed to be from 4:30 to 5:30, if possible, we can try and condense it a bit. My request to the panelists and to the session chairman. This session is going to be about migration and toxicology, a threat to consumer safety. Instead of going into the details of explaining this session, let me just leave it to the session chairman to take it up from here. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Do you hear me? Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for this introduction. Dear guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here especially because I see many familiar faces here in the auditorium. And I would like to call another speaker to the scene, to the stage. This is Evert Delbanco. Please, Evert, this is my colleague, Evert Delbanco. As you have heard, Ashish has stolen this introduction because this is really the second toxicologist worldwide, globally, in the ink industry. So, so Evert is a chemist, and Evert is a European registered toxicologist. He has more than 15 years professional experience, and he started with Henkel. Currently, Evert is Director of Food Safety and Toxicology at Siegwerk, and he has a global expert role for toxicology and ink safety. He shares his expertise amongst various expert committees in the European Printing Ink Association called EUPIA. So welcome, Evert. Yeah, I think we should not lose too much time. The session title is Migration Toxicology, Threat to Consumer Safety, and evidently our speakers will address this topic. They will go from migration principles, they will explain them, of course, towards hazardous materials, hazardous substances, which we have to worry about, and how to deal with them. So I would like to call now Professor Sharma to give his presentation. Thank you.
Very good afternoon to each one of you. And the persons who are at the back, may I like to disturb them a little. If they can come forward, it would be my pleasure. And I thank the August gathering as well as the key invitees for me, the persons who was at the background and who said that you have to come. It was Deepak. And I really find it very interesting in the month of August with the August gathering. I have carried two things here. You may say, what's the purpose? But I start migration and toxicology from here. On the one, it is written, which is given to you, is ink, heart, and soul. It is spirituality, it is the consumer part, it is the heart, that is how we can think about the particular chemical or a material with a different perception. So this is just to indicate, and the color itself is red, and the color of the blood is again red. Is it the toxicologists think from a different perspective? Yes. And they see in the benefit of the consumers. They think in the benefit of the society, but at the same time they try to understand the chemistry, the biology, and the different physiological systems. Now another bottle which I am carrying, it is just to give you a direct visual effect that package is important or water is important. You want safe water or you want safe packaging, or you want both. So this is just to give a start of my lecture. When we say about the toxicology and migration, or revert, migration and toxicology. I just have a thought process, drive with caution. You have a car, and if you think that there will be an accident, will you put your car in a garage and keep it for 20 years, 25 years, because there will be no accidents? Or you will drive with caution. So same is the case with particular field which we are discussing about packaging. And you see in the center, we have a variety of food items, and when we see about the different items, we find that the materials are of different categories, and these categories may be varying in the constitution. The packaging is called a silent salesman because they decipher the different information. They are close to your heart. At the same time, the wastage of the material is reduced. But I would say extra packaging is not needed. Too much packaging is not needed. If you have one simple packaging, it's sufficient. But in the market, if you go today, you find extra packaging. So I'm just putting the thought process and a big question mark in front of you. You know about the answer, you know about the problem also. But you were seeing and passing it by. It is just like the accident happening in the modern scenario and the person's just crossed the road and say, it must have happened. When it is a person who is known to you, then you are thought. When you have to go to the hospital, when you have to go to the trauma center, then you realize how it happened, what happened. There are many things similarly in the packaging sector. I want to focus from this perspective. The market scenario. All of us know, I do not want to focus here the data, that the consumption pattern is increasing. Whether it is any magazine of plastics, packaging or innovation, we are finding on one side we say, reduce it. But on the other side, the next 50 year or 100 year, the packaging market will grow. So the safety of your job, your scenario, your growth is well preserved. So you should not worry for that. But the next responsibility is how I can make it more compatible or safe proof. And for that perspective, I would say that we have to think about the additives. What are the additives? So far the additive is not migrating, not leaching from the final product to the stored material. There is no problem. The problem starts if it is migrating from the packaging material into the stored in material, whether it is any food material or water. Why I am saying water as a separate? Because still in the world, some say water is food, some say no, water is different category. So I am emphasizing whatever perception your might be, but it is a H2O, it is a 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. Bonding, what is a wonderful bonding it is? It is a covalent bonding. Covalent bonding teaches you sharing. And sharing is, again, there is another important property is solubility. And solubility, if you say in the common terms, it is the heart-to-heart interaction, which I showed in the beginning. It is red, it is heart, and again the bonding. The bonding, the solubility factor is leading to the many of the, whether it is phthalic acid ester, bisphenol A, migration, and what is the limits? It is 6.5 to 8.5 is the normal range which is given as per IS 10500. But most of the persons say that it is 7 pH. It is not only 7, the recommended value is 6.5 to 8.5. Then we find in the country, are there guidelines? Or there might be a question, is the new guideline needed for any of the packaging material? Answer is certainly yes. Why? Because the chemical composition, the ingredients, the different type of finished products, they are regularly changing, and these change is so dynamic in nature that if I am producing after 1 month, the new material of packaging may be coming with a different composition, speciation, and if I, as a toxicologist or as an analytical chemist, if I have to analyze, we find the different mixtures. And in some of the case, another important point is that sometimes the migration may not be because of the plastic. Because of our equipments, the equipments are made up of plastic, so even in control experiments, we have found that the traces of phthalic acid or the phthalates may come out. And thus, we have to run a double and triple controls. The controls are needed so that we can minus the actual results and find out the reality behind the, and another, I will not like the word contaminant, I would say toxicant. Because that toxicant is coming from the system or it is from the food packaging material. So the important point is machinery, manpower, capacity building, and the fourth point is that the material itself, what is the composition, in what condition it was used. The persons in India, it is written in bottle, all these bottles, that it should be packed and sold in the market in cool condition. But if you go on the roadside, you find all the beverages and this water as a display in the sunlight of about 50 degrees centigrade. And the same water is again packed and kept inside and given to you. And when you ask for mineral water, you are given packaged water. When you are asking for packaged water, you are given mineral water. And you gladly take it. Then the next question, is it written on the bottle? Yes, it is written. The guidelines are different. The IS 14543 is for packaged water. IS 13428 is for packaged water. But in the common society, multiple times in last about 3 decades, I have asked about 200 to 300 times this question, and 90% answers from the audience says that I want water, and the safe water and wonderfully packed, and I do not care for any other thing. And thus everything is written, but sometimes the next point is, what is the size? What is the dimension in which labeling and this, which was a critical issue which I stressed in the different meetings of the BIS and others, and we are taking the steps through the different regulatory agencies as well as with the CSI labs and the ISO bodies. So in the ISO bodies also this point has come: advertisement, labeling, numerals, what should be the size, what should be the indications. Then in view of the time constraint, I will rush on with few of the slides. So conceptualize and the strategy. What is the strategy? The strategy is towards the innovation, to the new developments. And this new development should be thorough, it should be foolproof, it should be scientifically and systematically arranged. The selection of the materials, the closures, the liners, the RFIDs, the nominations, the denominations and others, they are very important. The migration of substances, it not limited to only what we know in the newspapers. For example, we were talking about BPA. BPA is not only BPA. Now we have a new speciation, BPA-S. So the new R&D is coming up, that what are these new moieties, and is it the safe? Is it really coming into the levels which are very stringent, or they are problematic, and can we reduce it? The most of the attention is needed at R&D part is the solution based. Now that era of survey and field data is gone. We want solutions. Our management wants solution. Our country needs solution. Our consumer needs solution. In that perspective, I would like to say that it should be towards the solution based rather than just identifying the problem. But identification of problem is important to diagnose a particular disease, and similarly in this case we have to understanding of the mechanism of action of the different chemicals and their percolation or the mechanistic pathway in our biological system is needed, so that we can understand whether it is crossing the blood-brain barrier so as to reach to the brain, or it is just into the different systems. Now coming to the next point. These standards, once the standard has been set, is it final for all the years to come? No. They are changing. For example, the value of arsenic. It was decided, it was later changed to, because of the international scenario and the flux of the hydrogenomic conditions of the arsenic. So similarly, the phthalic acid ester is not mentioned amongst the limits, but it is found in traces. How it is coming in the water, how it is reaching to the soil, because of the percolation, and that is through the dump sites. So we have conducted the study in 2010 through the CPCB, and in the waste dump site area of Lucknow, we have found the phthalic acid ester is reaching to, in traces, I would not say in a drastic, in a high value, in a lower value in the dump site areas. And if there is a submersible pump, naturally, what will go? It will be the phthalic acid ester. Now to a biologist group who are here, there are endocrine disruptors. And these endocrine disruptors may disrupt the total system of the biology of biological system of a particular organism, and not limited to human being. It will, the flora and fauna, both will be affected. So now we are emphasizing on toluene free. Why? Because we want to go for the green chemistry. We want reduction of our chemicals in the usage of the different materials. And similar is the case here, that we want to have the reduction of the different chemicals in our day-to-day production of the final finished products of plastics or any other moieties. Labeling. Labeling is not for labeling purpose and getting the certification. The next point is, it should be readable. You should not have a particular high power resolution system to find out what is written. In most of the chemicals, either the size of the bottle is too small, or either the font size of the label itself or the material written there or the inscribed details are insufficient. So we have to see that it should be in the terms of the international norms. Now these international guidelines are FDA, WHO, OECD. What is OECD? Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Food Agriculture Organization. Food and Drug Administration. Why? The reason is that we have to think globally and act locally. I can't say that in Delhi a person should not know about what is happening in US or DIN standards. The DIN standard, ASTM standards are equally important for us whether we are in India. But we should also understand the Indian standards because we are in India. So my point is we should go with the concurrence of all the 7-8 prominent guidelines, and so that there can be a regular improvement, because our market, all your product has to go beyond the boundaries of the country, and thus there is a need for this. So right packaging is essential to avoid spoilage and to enforce the quality point of view. And this industry, is it growing? And it will grow? Answer is yes. But most of the small one will die. You may say, I was saying that it will grow. But on the second statement, I will say that the smaller will die because they will not be able to sustain the norms and stringent conditions. So it is equally important that either I raise my standard or I go out of the market. So it is the risk. If you do the SWOT analysis, you will find that your next in 10 years will be very, very tough for the uncompliant industry. They will go up automatically. And if you are complying to these standards, you will rise like anything. So you have to decide, I want to wash out from the system or I want to exist. So it is a very tough decision. Next, the food may pick up, what are contaminants? These contaminants are physical or chemical or biological, or even they are maybe radiological. I don't want to create a hue and cry, but I want to emphasize that there can be other things which may be coming in a direct or indirect mode, and thus we should analyze. It is not that always it is written nil. The answer, when we search as an auditor, what is the value? What is the permissible limit? And even if it is coming in traces, what is the concentration? That is important because that concentration may multiply in the years to come, or with the passage of time, or with the usage pattern, or with the phase. Because Parcelus has said simply in the beginning, it was one of the slides, it is the dose which differentiate between a drug and a poison. And it is the route of exposure. It is the age and sex also. So the same chemical like sodium chloride we eat daily. It is non-toxic. But when we take the transfusion, it is 0.9%. And instead of 0.9%, if it is increased to about 2% or 3%, immediately there will be a mortality. I was sitting at the side of a toxicologist, and Peter has intentionally thought that the two toxicologists may be at the side and they may think in a different way. And you don't know that the toxicologists become very friends because they understand the language in their own way. And the toxicologists think that I have to just think for the lethal dose, LD50, or I have to find about the NOL. So what is the ADI value? Then after the third step, I think about the average daily intake, and thus we are able to defend. So addresses, the concerns are many, only the few points have been highlighted, and which can take you as a step ahead regarding the impurities, the byproducts, contaminants, speciation, and all that. For each of the topic, I need about 4 to 5 hours, which is not allowed by. So I will just give you a hint that the speciation, the chemical structure, the molecular binding, the physiological systems becomes very important. And now the next point is waste disposal. How I am disposing my plastic bottle, whether it is a flexible or a rigid plastic, because it is a plastic. And what are the ingredients or byproducts, and how much time it will take, whether it is in 1 year or 20 years or 2000 years. The answer will be depending on all scenarios, including the environmental conditions. And we need for sustainability, and this sustainability part, the bioplastics becomes very important. Here I would like to point out, in one of the slides I have shown only of 2017 journals, and the papers, and they are highlighting that it is should be towards environmental sustainability. Why? Because now we need bioplastic. We need the water bottle, not like this. We want, and there is already a development in the world. You have a bubble, and bubble is edible in nature. You just swallow that, and you are taking the water also and the bubble also, and there is no perishable part, or you have not to throw any bottle. It is just like you are taking that balloon shape structure, putting into your mouth, swallowing it, you are having the packaging material as well as the water inside. So that is the innovation, that is the future of our plastic industry. And we find there are multiple solutions in this way. The growth is increasing, and this packaging sector is marvelous with lot of innovation, and already the green chemistry concept has gone into the in-depth with 4 to 5 different contributions of recent 3 years, or even including mine, in the area of bioplastics. Now, this takes you to the structure part, and when we see about the structure part, we have to see whether it is a BPA free, phthalate free, and other toxicants free. And thus we find that there are issues which is reaching to the different organs of the body. And what is needed? When you see this particular slide, it looks simple, but I want to focus, there is a need of a focus attention on a focused topic, and there is a need of a coordination to protect the environment or the earth. And this can be through the design, through the logistics, through the marketing, and through the different agencies, if I want to see the light like this. Thank you for your patience hearing. Because of the time constraint, I had just flickered in your mind, and I can say this clap would be a clap in my true spirit and hearts if you think that you can contribute even 1% of your real thing. So try to involve your spiritualism, your scientific aspect, your inheritance for the future, and making a bright future for the children to come in the years and thousands of years ahead. With all these words and heartiest wishes for Janmashtami, for Raksha Bandhan in a different way, I say wonderful. You'll hear many of the things from Krishna. Don't just say Krishna, Krishna or Hare Ram. The Krishna, Hare Ram, Bible, Quran, whatever you read, everyone says think for the environment, think for the better, think for the society, and that is a true bonding or a Raksha Bandhan and the friendship. With all this, and happy New Year.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Sharma, for this really lively presentation. I would like to call my colleague. Voice? Okay. Better now? Okay. I would like to call my colleague, Dr. Evert Delbanco now for his presentation. Evert, please talk about ink safety beyond legal requirements.
Yes, hello also from my side. My presentation has 2 parts. The first one is called Food Packaging Safety, a must-have. And in the first part, I would like to highlight the importance of food safety, why it is so important, to give some evidence, why we have seriously to deal with it. And in the second part, I would like to focus on 2 substances, or at least on one substance, which is toluene, and on a group of substances which are the mineral oils, and show you the potential threats of these substances and this category of substances, and show you how Siegwerk is dealing with these issues. So let's first talk about regulations. So we are facing in the last years a really increasing number of regulations, and this is also triggered by some food safety scandals, but at least the situation is as such that we have more and more regulations. So in order to be compliant, it is becoming a bigger and bigger challenge also in the future. And one part of being compliant is of course being safe. And if we deal with food safety, we have automatically to deal with migration as well, because migration is really a serious issue and a very important issue in terms of food safety. And there's one additional challenge, which is the media. So some authorities have implemented so-called rapid alert systems in order to inform about potential threats also coming from food safety. And this makes life not necessarily easier, so it makes it more complicated. And there's another issue which are the social media. So they also have tremendous power. So as soon as there's an issue, it can be overnight going around the globe via the social media. And this is actually really another challenge. And directly connected with this issue of social media is also the strength of analytical methods. So also the detection limits of analytical methods are getting better and better. And for that reason, the so-called perceived safety comes into play. So if I, as a toxicologist, say a product is safe or an application is safe, that does not necessarily mean that this is also the opinion of the consumers. So if, for example, my mother has the feeling that a product is unsafe, then it is unsafe according to her perceived safety, and she's not willing anymore to buy it. So we have also to deal with this perceived safety. So toxicologists, I completely agree, are very important, but they are responsible for the safety. The perceived safety is a different issue. That are our customers. So I already mentioned, as soon as we have to deal with safety, migration is a very important issue. And on the left side, you can see a picture of a PE bottle, and you can easily notice that it is not always a sufficient barrier. So substances can pass this, it is not a barrier, substances can pass. So talking about a barrier, we need to talk about aluminium foil, at least as a minimum of 6 μ. It is a sufficient barrier, and glass as well. And migration follows generally 2 different principles. The first one you can see on the right side is the diffusion scheme. That means that substances are able, migrants are able to transfer through the packaging into the food, and migrants with a molecular weight below 1,000 Daltons can do the same exercise also can enter human cells, can pass human cell membranes. And secondly, talking about migration, I also have to mention the set-off migration. This depends on the technology of printing and storage conditions as well. So ink, I'm talking about ink, can go onto the reverse side of the substrate, and finally on the reverse side it is potentially in direct contact with food. I picked out some examples for food safety scandals in the past, which were related to migration. And Barun also from Nestle also showed a very nice overview, which contains exactly my examples. So first one is, of course, it cannot miss, is the ITX scandal in 2006. ITX is a photo initiator, and the migration type we were facing at that time was set-off, and finally millions of liters of juice and milk had to be recalled, and in the meantime ITX is banned by many authorities and brand owners. There was another scandal in Europe in 2009, benzophenone. It was migrating via the diffusion principle from sleeves into cream. And also this product was recalled due to many consumer complaints because they were able to smell or even to taste benzophenone. Then we had the noodle scandal in India 2 years ago, which I have to mention is not directly related to food contact material, but nevertheless it has a really huge impact on food safety. So the noodle packs were alleged with higher levels on lead than allowed, and FSSAI ordered to withdraw all instant noodle variants from the market, terming that they are unsafe and hazardous for the consumer. And the last example is about a very recent scandal in Germany. So it is about mineral oils. So different types of food were analyzed for mineral oils, and in 8 out of 20 different products in chocolate and in chips, enhanced amounts of mineral oils were detected, and the consequence was that some retailers decided to put these kind of products out of their shelves. And another impact was that these investigations triggered other investigations also in other countries. So this slide I took from Stephen Klum from Nestle. I liked it very much. Stephen Klum is the Nestle head of packaging safety and quality, and it shows really what can happen. So normally it takes years to build up trust and fidelity in brand and products, but as soon as something is going wrong, and, for example, perceived safety is not given anymore, it can take only seconds to destroy that trust. And of course, Siegwerk, as an ink manufacturer, seriously tries to avoid such kind of scenarios for our converters and, of course, our brand owners as well. So what is the impact of such kind of scandal? It is, of course, it is on the first hand the brand damage, which is obvious. So it could not only affect one brand, it can also affect other brands from the same company. Then you have direct costs. Secondly, direct costs in order to recall all the products. And finally, on the left bottom corner, you see empty shelves. So an empty shelves means that there's no turnover anymore. So let me come now to the second part of my presentation, dealing mostly with toluene and mineral oils. But first, I would like to start with a slide introducing you into a general formulation of an ink. So it is very easy. An ink can be made out of 4 major categories of substances. First one is the solvent. Secondly, the binders. Third are the colorants, and fourth category are the additives. So talking about the solvents first. So the aim of the solvents is viscosity control, the drying rate, and the range, the concentration range of solvents in the solvent-based ink is between 50 and 70%. The binders are dispersion medium for the pigments, and they are also responsible for certain physical properties. and the concentration range is between 15 and 30%. Then we come to the color or pigments. They are responsible also for the fastness properties, and the concentration range is between 12 and 20%. And finally, the additives, and this is really potentially a very big group of individual substances. The concentration range is between 4 and 8%, so they are, for example, responsible for the flexibility of the ink, and in this case I'm talking about plasticizers, but there are a lot of other properties which we as an ink manufacturer need to ensure. So, for example, defoamer are also a very good example for additives. So, as there are not only solvent-based inks on the market, but also, for example, UV inks. Of course, the composition is different for UV inks because in UV inks we do not have solvents. We have a higher amount of binders and additives. The colorants are the concentration range of colorants are in about the same range as for solvent-based inks. So here you can see the situation on the Indian market. Let's start with toluene. So toluene, as Ashish already mentioned, 90% of the rotogravure market contains toluene-based inks. And the concentration of toluene in the inks can be up to 40%. And furthermore, the toluene drift is getting stronger as more global brand owners are asking about it. We also heard examples about that. And on the other hand, the implementation of toluene-free inks is slowing because of first unawareness and of course for cost reasons. Toluene is easily available and it is very cheap. Coming to mineral oils, so currently in the sheet-fed UV market, it is only a mineral oil-based market. The concentrations of mineral oils are in a range of 30 to 50%. The mineral oil drift is still pretty weak. Exemptions are some very big brand owners who are asking for that, but in general, the mineral oil drift is much weaker than the toluene drift. So let's come now to some properties of toluene and mineral oils. So I would like to start with toluene and with an environmental issue, which is air pollution or the photochemical smog. So toluene as a volatile organic compound can contribute in combination with nitrous oxides to the formation of ozone, which is responsible for the photochemical smog. And I choose a picture from the Millennium Post. I think it was 2015, 2 years ago, which clearly demonstrates that it is also an issue here in Delhi. And as far as I know, we are very close to this place, which you can see here. There are some more risks. Of course, photochemical smog has also an impact on human health. But there are some other issues. So, for example, on the top left corner, you see an example for skin irritation or dermatitis. So that can occur via direct skin contact. Then, which is really a severe toxicological endpoint, it is reprotoxicity. So toluene is suspected to harm the unborn child. And right in the middle, you see an example for, it should be an example, or it is an example, and hopefully you can see it. It is imbalance. because toluene has also ototoxic potential, which means it's toxic to the ear. Yeah, so it's a specific target organ, and this can cause imbalance. And on the left bottom corner, you see it can also cause hardness of hearing or even anacusia. And these effects are intensified by industrial noise. So this is a short summary about potential health risks of toluene. So the first examples are directly related to the photochemical smog. So it's breathing difficulties, eye and throat problems, exhaustion, dizziness, hallucinations, memory loss, confusion. Then I mentioned skin irritation and dermatitis. I mentioned the reprotoxic potential of toluene, and by the way, in the European Union, it is legally classified as reprotoxic category 2. So it's classified by law. And I also mentioned the ototoxic potential of toluene. Then there's one more aspect I would like to highlight, which is the fact that toluene is worldwide misused as sniffing drug. And because it is easily available, it is cheap, it is not covered by any laws in this respect, so it is misused as a sniffing drug, and you can receive sensation of euphoria, but on the other hand you can getting addicted by this drug, and it is a so-called gateway drug, which is the first step in order to consume even harder drugs. Yeah. So now I mentioned environmental impact of toluene. I talked about human health hazard. I also talked about occupational issue with this ototoxicity. And maybe some of you ask yourself, yes, but what is the impact for the consumer? And the impact on the consumer I would like to demonstrate with this chromatogram. What we did is we collected samples, food samples in the supermarket. This example I choose is an example with instant noodle. And we analyzed the packaging as well as the noodles. And this chromatogram is related to the food, to the noodles. And as you can see, there's a big peak of toluene. So that means toluene containing inks were used, and there was residual toluene available migrating through the package into the food. And we are talking about more than 700 ppb of toluene in the food. And to be honest, in this range, we also have organoleptic detection, yeah, which is according to globally available framework regulations not allowed. Coming to mineral oils. So if we talk about mineral oils, we have to differentiate between MOSH and MOA. So MOSH is mineral oil saturated hydrocarbons, and MOA are mineral aromatic hydrocarbons. On top, you can see an example for MOSH. So these are linear or branched alkanes, and according to the European Food Safety Agency, EFSA, the scope is with a chain length from 10 to 50, carbon chain length from 10 to 50. On the bottom, you see just an example for MOA. And mainly we are talking about alkyl substituted polyaromatic hydrocarbons. The definition of the chain length is the same according to EFSA. This is the scope. And you can easily imagine that if we talk about mineral oils, it covers an endless number of different substances. So the group of mineral oils is endless. Toxicological properties. So, starting with MOSH, so there were no adverse effect observed in the carbon chain length from 10 to 13. In a carbon chain length from 16 to 35, these mineral oils can accumulate in the organism. For example, in the adipose tissue, in the lymph node, in the liver, and in the spleen. And they can induce lipogranulomas in the lymph nodes, in the liver, and in the spleen as well. So the toxicological relevance of these lipogranulomas is not that big compared to the effects which can be caused by MOA. And in the group of MOA, there are certain substances which have 3 rings and no or little alkylation, and these substances are regarded to be genotoxic carcinogens. And there are some higher alkylated polyaromatic hydrocarbons which can act as non-genotoxic carcinogens, so as tumor promoters. And similar to MOSH, also MOA, but to a higher extent, I must say, they can also accumulate in the human body. So, I've shown you now the toxicological threats of toluene on the one hand and of mineral oils on the second hand. But of course, there are more threats. So that is not sufficient to be just compliant or just safe in terms of toluene and mineral oils. So there are many other substances in an ink which need to be carefully assessed and which can cause potential threats. So in this table, there's an overview and some examples for additional potential threats categorized by the type of ink. So there are solvent-based inks. So a threat of solvent-based inks is, of course, residual solvents, and the risk is non-conformity with regulations and brand owner requirements. Then we have in water-based inks and in solvent-based inks the issue of plasticizers, and the risk is bad publicity. So again, it is not a toxicological safety issue for many plasticizers. They can be regarded as safe, or they can be put into an ink as an ingredient with later application, which can be regarded from the toxicological point of view as safe. But in the publicity, and I'm talking again about perceived safety, the judgment is different, or the evaluation is different. Then, talking about solvent-based inks, we have the 2K systems, and the issue with the hardeners. There we can have residual dye isocyanate monomers, and the risk is sensitizing effects. Coming to the right side, the UV inks. There we have the photoinitiators. I already touched the issue of photoinitiators with ITX and benzophenone. But very often, as they are very reactive, they can also react with the DNA. And that means very often they are potential CMR substances. And breakdown products of photoinitiators, they have a high migration potential and can also have CMR properties. So CMR means carcinogenic, mutagenic, reprotoxic. In UV systems, we have also the binding agents, which are acrylates, and here we have an issue of sensitizing effects. What is the threat? The threat is that you can develop allergies out of sensitizing substances. And for all different categories of inks, we have the issue of pigment contaminations, and most of the examples I mentioned here are are carcinogen or toxic. So, for example, the dioxins, the polychlorinated biphenyls, hexachlorobenzene, or alkyl phenol ethoxylates. just to give you some ideas. All the time I talked about IS, intentional added substances, which are put on purpose, for example by Siegwerk as ingredient into an ink. But there are also NIS, non-intentional substances, available. They are in the raw materials which we use to manufacture our inks available, and they were put by our suppliers, for example, into the raw materials. But at least we have to deal with this NIS as a kind of contamination. So in blue highlighted here is the definition of NIS. So NIS are all chemical substances which are not IS and do not have an intended and specific function within the ink formulation. And we differentiate between two categories of NIS. So the first one is the known NIS, which are usually added by our raw material supplier. For example, starting monomers, catalysts, process aids. They are available in the raw materials, but for us, in the ink, they do not have a specific function. But we are taking our responsibility very careful and evaluating also these non-intentionally added substances. We make and perform risk assessments for that. And then, even more tricky are the unpredicted NIS. These are results from, for example, site reaction, degradation reactions, former production steps, cross-contamination. And for these kind of substances, even the chemical structure is often unknown, which of course makes risk assessment difficult. So as soon as you do not have a structure, it is difficult to look for toxicological data. But we also have solutions for that, and this part will be covered by Jörg in the next session. So this is my last slide, and summarizes what Siegwerk is doing and what kind of solution Siegwerk offers. So as Ashish already mentioned, we are changing next year in India to NT inks. So there are all alternative solvents available, and we are fully committed to that. There are also mineral oil-free inks available. Alternatives are vegetable oil esters, and we also take the issue of mineral oils very serious, and we are about to go with the same journey as for toluene. But it will take some more time. Then we have migration optimized safe inks on the market. So you know, maybe you are familiar with the abbreviation LMLO. So low migration, low odor. So we have migration optimized safe inks on the market. And what's standing behind is a thorough selection and evaluation of raw materials, including the NIS, as I mentioned in the slide before. And yes, I think it is so important to talk about NIS and to talk about potential threats of NIS and to be also on the safe side in terms of NIS that I highlighted it here. We have established a NIS risk assessment process, and which NIS need to pass within Siegwerk, and we communicate the results also down the packaging chains via our statement of composition. And Jörg will go much more into detail in terms of NIS assessment and all these processes. So, yes, thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Evert, for this nice presentation, and also for highlighting the fact that the often used slogan here on the Indian market, NT&K, is not sufficient, because there are much more other threats and much more other contaminants which you have to watch out for, and what we are doing as a responsible ink manufacturer. And also, thank you for addressing this perceived safety aspect, which I think is a topic which will give us in future a lot of concern and food for thought. Okay, so in the interest of time, I would like now to call Dilip Singh to the microphone and giving us the presentation, Packaging Migration and Harmful Element Compliances.
Very good evening to distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to address you all, and I would also like to thank Siegwerk for taking this initiative, because food packaging is as important as food. We have many regulations in India for food, but I think it is very good to hear that we are also going much forward in terms of food packaging, because it is a need of an hour to really put so much of regulation at front of food packaging. Here I would like to talk about migrations, different sort of migrations, and their limits in this regard of different elements. As the previous speakers has also told about, we really have to think globally and act locally. Many of the packaging industry, many of the people who are working for packaging, it is not just for the domestic industry, but it's also in export of US, Europe, and many parts of the world. SGS being the leaders in testing, inspection, certification, we take this responsibility to educate the supply chain, because it is not just about doing the work about testing, inspection, certifications, given audits to the supply chain, but it is also as important to update about the new regulations. And in this world, the knowledge isn't power. So it is very important to be updated about the new regulations, so that you can really uplift yourself, and at the same time you can work to really grow your business, to be educated about those regulations, so that you can not just work locally in India, but can also have an exports to the different parts of the world. Here, as I mentioned before, food packaging, of course, there are many of sort of packaging, paper, plastic, many tin, metallic, all those packages are being used. How you would like to analyze that whether it is safe for the use or not? When it comes to the food packaging, a very basic questions which is being asked, that when it is being analyzed that whether it is safe or not, it is first of all that food contact material must not transfer any constituents or components in the food which may endanger the human health, may not change the food composition in an unacceptable way, and also should not deteriorate the organoleptic characteristic of food, the smell, the taste of the food. This is something which is very basic and need to be identified when we are talking about any transfer or migration in a food packaging. In migration, there are two things which need to be understand. First is the overall migration limit, OML, and second is the specific migration. In Indian, if you understand about the overall migration, I'm sure a lot of experts have given a detail about many harmful chemicals, their effects to the human and the environment. But to talk really about to the layman, to the basic person to understand about the overall migration, it is just to see how many amount of residual from the packaging material has migrated into the food stuff. If you see the Indian regulations as well as the international regulations, both has a limit of 10 mg per decimeter square or 60 mg per kg. These are two limits which is available for this overall migration. When you come to the specific migration, it is just to see how many of specific chemical substances has been migrated from the packaging material to the food. And since it is a specific requirement, so it is varies. The limit varies from chemical to chemical, and it is being mentioned in the standards. And then third would be the additive contents and monomer, which has already been limitized not to be used in the packaging material. BPA content, of course, a lot have already been told about this. Bisphenol A, yeah, of course, it not to be used. Mainly, it started with the infant feeding bottles like polycarbonate. vinyl chloride monomer in the PVC contained. So I will first take about the overall migration in a very basic term. In case of overall migration, when you see as a testing laboratory, when we test that, it has to be tested with a simulant which can really make a simulant of the actual food packaging. So as per the standards, this reference has been given as per the European standards, and in a coming slide I will also touch about the Indian standards. Like any aqueous food packaging material would be tested with 10% ethanol. If it is acidic, then it would be tested with 3% acetic acid. If it is alcoholic, then depending upon the amount of alcohol, it can be tested with 20% ethanol and maybe with a 50% ethanol. And maybe a food can be a fatty food, then it has to be tested with the vegetable oil like olive oil. And if it is the dry, then it has to be tested with the 10x, which is a poly-2,6-diphenyl paraphenyl oxide. So it is basically for the dry, if any food is a dry material, it's like in a powder form. And if it is a milk, then milk has to be tested with oil in water emulsion with 50% ethanol, and some other also being available. So basically I would also like to touch base about the Indian standards in this context. For Indian standards, if it is aqueous, then it is being tested with distilled water, acidic with 3% acetic acid, alcoholic with 10%, 50% ethanol, depending upon the constraint of alcohol in the food, and fatty with anhaptane, as earlier we had olive oil in the European regulations, and dry, there is no AND test. So basically it is very important to understand that in the terms of migration, in a very layman knowledge, the migration has been a very simple, the migration which has been happened from the packaging to the food, and it should not be with the certain limit and should not endanger the human health and other issues. But at the same time, the other important factors also need to be addressed, like the type, whether it is fatty, whether it is acetic acid, or whether it is alcoholic. So all those things has to be taken into care of. And of course, some might of packaging may not just be with the one single food. It might also possible that it is being used with different sort of food. And definitely in that case, it has to be addressed that it meets all those requirements. For example, if it's something with all food types, then it has to be checked with 10% ethanol, 3% acetic acid and vegetable oil, just to take a holistic view of acidic base, alcoholic base, and the fatty food base as well. When anything which is not acidic food, then it has to be tested with ethanol and vegetable oil based. Any aqueous, acidic and alcoholic food has to be tested with acidic and ethanol. So likewise it has to be tested what all it will going to be come across food packaging. Then second thing need to be considered, of course the one thing which we have just seen is the different constituents in the food, and then comes to the timing period. So it is very important that for how long and what temperature this food packaging will come into contact. So there is a different standards. This has been taken into reference from the European regulation. So basically there are different regulations in terms whether it's a frozen or a refrigerator conditions, and whether it will be a prolonged conditions maybe of 10 days. It may be a long-term storage with a normal room temperature, when it can go up to 40 degrees Celsius for 10 days and 70 degrees for 2 hours. And some regulation also been taken care of the food utensils and all. So it is not just limited to the packaging, but it is also covered the food care. So you can see those regulations like 100 degrees Celsius for 4 hours and all sort of thing, which may not directly related to the packaging industry. So so these three things need to be considered: the base of the food, the time which will going to be contact, and of course the temperature. All these three constraints make sure that how much of migration will eventually going to be happen from the packaging material to the food. So these all has been taken in reference with OM standards. And then so this is what we have considered while we make a measurement in our laboratories for taking a holistic view of overall migrations. And then it comes to the specific migration. Heavy metals, a lot has already been taught about heavy metals, about the harmful effect. It can really affect the central nervous system. It is carcinogenic and all. So this also has to be in the limit. specific migration of 1-octene and 1-hexene in polypropylene and polyethylene, specific migration of ethylene glycol, diethylene glycol on PET, polyethylene terephthalate, specific migration of vinyl chloride monomer on PVC, specific migration of acryl nitrile on ABS, and bisphenol O on polycarbonate and epoxy coatings, Nodge and batch derivatives on epoxy coating, some specific migration of vinyl acetate on EVA. So basically it is being observed, if you see the international regulations and to some extent the local regulations, it always makes some essence and some reference that these particular chemicals may have a tendency to specifically migrate on this particular material. So in that context, it is very important for you that if, for example, if you are working with ABS or PVC, then there is something which is more relative. Like if you are working with PVC, then phthalate is something which is of a very high concern for you. And if you are ABS, then acrylonitrile is something. So in that context, if the basic component of your packaging may have some tendency because of its manufacturing or maybe because of that process, that it may have some tendency of having some specific migration of some 10 harmful chemicals, which you really need to address and make sure that it is not going to be fall in your packaging material. Here I have just taken a specific migration limit of heavy metals. It has taken the reference of EU 2017-752 with it is something which will going to happen in 2019, but already the industry has already implemented it, and industry has already started testing with these norms, taking all these 9 elements in place. Nickel is a new one. Other 8 was already there, although there is a little change in the requirements of zinc and one more component here. Then of course phthalates we already discussed upon. In case of migrations, certain list has been identified for the high risk materials. So as we know that many of the components are very harmful, if you talk about aromatic amines or acrylonitrile or formaldehyde or merylamine, but all these components may have some tendency on the high risk materials. So that has been shortlisted, because if you see basically if you see the list of the parameters which need to be compliant, it can really be a long list. So it is very, very important to understand what material we are using it, what would be the exposure of the food material, and third but not the last but not the least, that what can be the high risk material for my component, where I can really address more on that aspect. So here this can also be addressed. So this has also been there. I have touched about other migration and high risk chemicals like EVA, PVC, epoxy, PET, and some of the monomer and substance. I think not to add more on pH or phthalate, which have already been covered before. Yeah, and some tests has been mentioned about the ink, food packaging and color pigments, as already distinguished speakers have already spoke about, so I will not going to touch upon more on that part. So this has been taken care. So this is how it is important to cover about overall migration, specific migration, and the limit with different harmful chemicals. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Singh. I think on this nice presentation on all these methodologies which you offer as an analytical service provider, and which are all based on European testing requirements, at least mostly. So I think it's since we are at the end of this session, it's a good opportunity to ask questions to our speakers. So please, are there any questions you would raise and you would like to be clarified from our speakers? No questions? Yes, please. There is a question over there, please. Can you please hand the microphone?
Hi, I have a question for overall migration and specific migration. One thing I want to ask about that in specific migration, there are some substances which are already mentioned in standard. But what about the NIAS substances which are non-intentionally added? So if we found those substances in the migration studies, then are there any standards or any SML limits for that?
Did you get the question? Take mine.
Okay, what I have understood from you is that basically you want to ask that there are specific migration, some are intentionally being added, and maybe something which had been added unintentionally,
Yes.
right? I understand something which is not added intentionally, it is easy to control that. But something if it's added intentionally, then it is difficult. But in terms of regulations, it has been mentioned for both. In fact, if you see PVC phthalates and all, in many of the cases it is being used as a plasticizer. So mostly since industry is being evolving, and I think Indian industry is also evolving a very lot, and slowly and gradually they are also putting more regulations on that front. So they are covering both the one substances which is adding intentionally, as well as one who added intentionally because of some side effects and all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, please.
It was a nice question. I would like to say here that chemical is a chemical. Whether it is a additional or intentional or unintentional, you have to see what is the limit, what is the concentration, how it is reaching, and what can be the implications. So it is, you have to see as a X as a chemical, what is the master safety data sheet, what is the COA of that particular chemical will decide the other course of action and the safety aspects.
Yes.
Yes, I also may add, talking about the NIAS, so they are not regulated. So taking the example of the Swiss ordinance, so NIAS are not in scope. And that's the reason why I took the title for my presentation, Product Safety Beyond Legal Requirements. So as soon as we do risk assessments, for example for NIAS, we are far beyond the legal requirements. We are safer than legally required.
Yes, please, another question. Yes, over there. Oh, sorry.
Hello. Hello to panelists.
We take you after. Thank you. Sorry.
Actually, this question goes to toxicologist. The limit for heavy metals migration is 100 ppm by weight. Now suppose there is a migration of mercury and it will be say 90 to 99. Will it be harmful?
So I can give you a very, very easy answer with the approach of perceived safety. So in terms of perceived safety, of course not. So because as soon as there's mercury in food, consumer will say, no, consumer will not accept that. And you potentially have a serious issue afterwards. However, you are in legal compliance. Yeah? From the toxicological point of view, it is difficult. So for example, for carcinogenic substances, which are genotoxic, for genotoxic carcinogens, so the approach toxicologists are doing is the one hit model. So that means one single molecular can be enough in order to react with the DNA and to cause cancer. So for that reason, in order to generate thresholds for genotoxic carcinogens, the approach is to use a tolerated risk in terms of additional cancer deaths per million people. Yeah. So that's the answer I can give you. Hopefully it's okay for you.
No, but the regulation says 100 ppm is pass. So then how the things are going to be controlled?
Sorry, I did not get it.
Most of the ink manufacturers, they commit for less than 100 ppm by weight migration. Less than. So it can be 90. And it can be one of the 5. So let's consider mercury, which is the more dangerous. So then how we are going to control or how the safety will be ensured?
Yes, in terms of heavy metals, we do internal checks, and we have this on the scope, and it is regularly done by us. Of course, I can only talk for Siegwerk. For Siegwerk, I can say we captured the problem. Yeah.
I may want to add typical concentrations are of course lying much lower. It's in the range of few ppm if at all. Yeah, even lower. So that would be the answer. Yeah. You want to add? Okay. I would like to give a question to Mr. Bhagava.
Yeah. I wanted to understand on this benzophenone-free labels and all we have been talking. Is there a limit for this, or how do you go about testing? I mean, if Mr. Singh can answer on, is there any testing mechanism to find out, quantify the benzophenone in label or those kind of things?
You see, if you have a quantification, then of course it can be possible. But if you want to see whether you are using as a label in a packaging or what?
Yeah, it's for the package, for the injectables or even for oral powders.
Okay, so quantification, yes, can be possible, but limit I think need to be checked, because I think for Indian regulation I really doubt if there is an.
No, I am not aware. That's the reason I'm asking. What's the safe limit? I mean, maybe toxicologists can.
There is a limit in European Union. European Food Safety Authority has set a limit. It's 0.6 milligram per kilogram of foodstuff.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think we need to close, and if there are further questions, please approach the speakers during the break. So we close the session now.
Thank you very much. Very informative session. I'm sure there's a lot more discussion to follow later. But for now, before I let you off the dais, may I invite Mr. T.K. Datta to come and hand over some mementos. Mr. T.K. Datta is a former packaging manager at Reckitt's. Please hand over the mementos to Dilip Singh, Professor Sharma, Mr. Evert, Dr. Evert, and with this we'll quickly move into the next session.